Hello, my name is Beatriz Sosa, and I am here to talk to you today about Ford's biggest marketing failure, the Ford Edsel. So, some of the marketing flaws involved with this case study was the advertising, of course, and that included radio, television, newspaper, promotional campaigns, and store displays. Um, Also, the name was part of the issue for Ford. The economic timing that the car was launched during that time was also a issue. And of course, as you can see to your right, the design was something that the public did not prefer. So that was one of the flaws as well. And the manufacturing processes that were involved with making this car also contributed to the failure of this Edsel. So let's go ahead and just kind of get into the specifics of why was it an issue. So continuing the legacy of failure for Edsel, advertising was marketed as Edsel being one of the most innovative cars of its time, even though it wasn't. The technology involved in the car was not something drastically different from what the other cars that currently were on the market had. The launch date was even referred to as E-Day. So even on that same day, dealers, they were required to store their vehicles behind the showroom, behind a curtain. Prior to the actual launch date, the dealers were required to have all the Edsel cars undercover. So nobody could see it. It was highly secretive. There was a lot of hype, as you can see, on the car coming out. So even though it wasn't something that was seen, it was something that was highly advertised as being completely different, radically changing the industry. So in the way that it was advertised, even though it actually wasn't, and that's what ended up contributing to the flop of the car. So the name, it was named after Henry Ford's son. It didn't have any kind of meaning to the public, even though Ford did polls for the car to see what it would be named. It scratched all that at the very end, and it ended up going with this name of just last minute name, really, is what they ended up deciding on. So the name Edsel ended up becoming related or synonymous with something useless or unwanted. And if you go to dictionary.com and you look up something useless or unwanted, Edsel is an example of that. So it made it that far. So during the same time period, during the economic downturn, Ford was really competing against itself with lower prices. So there was a lot of other vehicles on the market that were better valued than the Edsel. So Ford launched this vehicle in November, and towards the end of the year, of course, car dealers want to get rid of their older models because they're going to be getting newer models. So a lot of these models that Edsel was competing against were models that it was a really good deal, and they were just really inexpensive. So Edsel came in here and came out during the same time period, but it didn't do very well also because there was a market downturn and there were a lot of vehicles that were already on sale to begin with. So that kind of contributed to that, where some of these better valued vehicles, they actually had a really good technology attached to it too. So it wasn't something that they were getting a cheap vehicle for cheap price because it didn't have anything. So they had pretty good, well-rounded vehicles being sold at that time, like the Fairline, for example. Ford was also competing with itself with a car that was very similar, like the Edsel, just a few luxury items that they changed a little bit. So that was something that they could have done differently too. So manufacturing line was added onto a current vehicle lineup. So the Edsel didn't have its own line. It was just thrown into the Lincoln and Mercury line. So first off, the workers felt like they were just being worked more they didn't feel the value of building this vehicle as if it were their own. It was just something that they had to do. Secondly, the knowledge wasn't really there. A lot of this technology that Edsel had, it wasn't something that a lot of people were trained on. So what ended up happening based off of this is that the vehicle that was sent to the car dealers was very poor. There were a lot of cars that were actually sent out with lists on the steering wheel saying these are the parts that are missing, or this is what doesn't work. So the car dealers were really left with these vehicles that they really couldn't sell. So and ultimately the answer to everything was Edsel was the answer to an unasked question. It wasn't something that was built across or with the interest of consumer demand or preferences. It was something that the company just wanted to build. So is this issue unique? Is this marketing issue unique? It's not. There have been other vehicles since then, including the DeLorean, the DMC-12, the Yugo, the Cadillac Cimarron, and the Volkswagen Thing that have been part of that type of failure, really, that Ford did with Edsel. So the company's response before and after, everything came out. So first off, it ignored completely the market downturn. It kept the full production of the 18 different designs of this car. Even though there were low sales, it continued full production. And if anything, even after the sales were low, it thought it maybe was a design. So it redesigned it a little bit, which wasn't much of a difference. That's why you see a little bit they look very similar, but just had a bit differences on the exterior. And then they continued to manufacture this in multiple different in designs. So it didn't just stick with one car; it just kept making 18 different variations of this new updated design. So they didn't accept defeat. They kept going, even though they weren't making the sales. So what they should have done is avoided the additional costs and just start on a new venture. So in hindsight, you can see that Ford, excuse me, you can see that Ford has learned, and they have had long-term success since then. And a lot of other companies have actually learned from this case study on things not to do from Ford. So it's something that has actually helped a lot of other companies to avoid the pitfalls that they did, including the marketing and everything else that they failed to see when they were actually going through Edsel. So that is it for my marketing portion. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Sandra Rodriguez, who's going to talk about our operational issues.